Dear Lord, as we gather from all parts of the world, and we look at Babylon, help us to understand the great controversy. May we understand this war. Where it began, what you are really fighting for, that we might be soldiers of the cross. Our role in this great controversy is inescapable now. May we be good soldiers. For this, we pray that you train us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. We're going to complete our look at the rise of modern Babylon. We drew up in our last presentation the Alpha of Israel and the Alpha of Babylon. And we saw that they both went through times of scattering. We believe that Babylon was rising when the Lateran Treaty was signed. All we have done is expand on that. To see the patterns of scattering and gathering. Scattered, gathered, and then scattered again. A counterfeit. That has been taught before. I wanted to add a few things. First, I wanted to make the point more strongly if that's a word, that you can't have a reform line for the beginning of modern Babylon. Because if God's people don't have that understanding, Satan doesn't. And he can create nothing of his own. That was the first new point. The second point I wanted to make was really anticipating questions. Where is the true of the Lateran Treaty? If we're going to compare and contrast, That's a major waymark you don't see on ours. Now, it's not that people are asking that question, I just anticipated it. But if you did ask it, my answer would be the following. "1818 for us is only a prophetic message. An internal spiritual restoration. Nineteen 1917 is more complicated. The complication comes in when you see what Satan has to do. You don't see Miller have to work with earthly governments. This is God restoring a church. This is Satan restoring a church state. That's the contrast. So you can't come here and see a parallel to the Lateran Treaty. That's where you're seeing how they're different. Third point I wanted to make was to add 2 predictions for each history. The only real external political event that Millerites predicted is 1840. And the only sign of the end of the world in their history was the falling stars. The only external political event they predict is World War II. And the signs of the times is considered by them to be the Fatima storm. That was the third point of this theme. The fourth is bringing in the second, or really the first leader of their history. John the Baptist paved the way, then came Christ. And at the very end, John the Baptist doubts. William Miller did a lot of the work, paved the way. At the end, he rejected. I would argue Pius XI paved the way. for Pius XII. The Pope of World War II. But at the end of his life, Pius XI rejects. He regrets everything he's done before. When we bring in Pius XI, it forces us to not just see the interactions between the Vatican and the King of the North, the Vatican and Germany. Now we see the Vatican and Italy. Just one point. Germany is still the King of the North. We can trace that. But you see, he has an inseparable partner in Mussolini. They're quite inseparable. So when you switch it, today in history of success, who's the King of the South? Putin, Russia. But has he got a friend? An ally? In some ways, a rival. But they have each other's back. You had Hitler and Mussolini. Russia is the King of the South, but is not alone. And I would argue that that is where we introduce China. But we aren't talking about China at this camp meeting. I just want to make that point. If we're talking about Italy here and tracing it prophetically, even though it isn't the King of the North, now you know how we can approach China. So Pius XI and Mussolini. We read a Catholic quote that says, no Italian government and perhaps no government in the world could have done so much in favor of the Catholic religion in a single year than Mussolini. So a couple of points to make before we continue. I'll put them over here. We just need to understand the publication. La Civiltà Cattolica. And Cardinal Gaspari. I wanted to introduce Gaspari. At the very beginning of Mussolini's leadership, he had a secret meeting with Gaspari. Gaspari came in one entrance. Mussolini in the other. This was the first formal meeting between Mussolini and Catholic leadership. And in those beginning days, they came to an agreement. Mussolini Pius XI, they would communicate through a mediator. The Jesuit priest, Pietro Tacci Venturi. This is the second of the two men we need to know. He never had a formal leadership position. That reflected how influential and powerful he really was. Just to quote his Wikipedia page, he was a Jesuit priest and historian. Who served as the unofficial liaison between Mussolini sorry, it's not in your quotes, and Pius XI and Pius XII. It's the only reference that's not in the quotes. Sorry about that. He became known as Mussolini's confessor. One German newspaper would refer to him as Mussolini's Rasputin. Rasputin, if we remember him from Russia. Rasputin was the spiritual guide behind Tsar Nicholas, especially the wife of Tsar Nicholas. Many people became very jealous of this man because no other such ambassador had more meetings, such frequent meetings with Mussolini. They met at least monthly to negotiate between the Italian government and the Vatican. So it took about 4 years for Mussolini to dismantle democracy. Perhaps it wasn't quite as manic as Hitler, but it was often through violence and control. And through those 4 years, his greatest aid was Vatican support. The influence Vatican support carried in a country that was 99% Catholic. We know that to get Hitler into full power, Pacelli dismantled the Catholic Centre Party. Italy also had a Catholic Centre Party. And the Vatican did the same thing, dismantled it. To give Mussolini full control. But what we want to discuss are the compromises, the racism, the church state. So this man who was the go-between, going to quote from something, from an interaction he had with Mussolini. In 1926. It's quote 10 in the document. In a document drafted in the summer of 1926, Taki Venturi identified the worldwide Jewish Masonic plutocracy as the greatest enemy the church faced. He called for strong government measures, including a special secret police to monitor Italy's Jewish bankers. The government should also abolish the stock exchange, which he dubbed the most potent means of the occult empire. And because the world's press was almost entirely in the hands of the Jews and the Masons, governments needed to limit freedom of the press in all matters dealing with business and finance. They had to recognize that the Jewish Masonic plutocracy lay at the root of all the world's economic and political problems. So this is the Vatican speaking to Mussolini. Telling Mussolini what he has to do to take care of the Jews. Now, I don't believe that Walter Weick thinks that he's racist. When he talks about the Rothschilds and those ancient Jewish bankers. Just because he doesn't say that they're Jewish. And then he talks about those Masons. And implies they're all background friends with the Vatican. Walter Weiff's occult empire. That you don't hear the press talk about. Because the people who control the press are part of that deep state occult. All Weiss has done is repeat century-old Vatican propaganda removed the word Jewish, the same propaganda Hitler used to justify the Holocaust. Some of us might know the company Weight Watchers. It's really targeting women, though it does men and women. It's Weight Watchers. Help mostly women get skinny. They changed their name last year to WW. And when they were asked what WW means, they said it doesn't mean anything. But now they advertise with that headline, wellness that works. Has the company changed? Nothing about that company has changed. They're still there to get women to lose weight. But it's not really nice to use the words anymore. They don't want to lose people to lose completely the sight of their brand because they're known by this name. So you'll still find it in other parts of their page. But the language has changed. You can't say weight loss anymore. You can say weight care. You can't say weight loss. It's the same thing. When Walter Weiss talks about that deep state, you can't talk about how they're Jewish. But there's no change to his message. We're looking at the roots of the mindset that Walter Weiss sells. And Ted Wilson's worldview is connected to that. It's more politically correct. But it's inescapable. By the way, Pietro Tacchi Venturi, he survived a stabbing. He blamed the international enemies of Mussolini. The only comment I want to make on that stabbing was that the Catholics' issues with sexual abuse did not start in the last few years. And the police stopped digging because the young man who stabbed him was not an enemy of fascism. It was personal. Lateran Treaty. I don't want to go into much discussion of the Lateran Treaty. Because we know of it. Quoting Mussolini. Having disposed of the prejudices of liberalism, the Duce explained, the fascist regime has repudiated the principle of separation of church and state. His government had worked hard to restore the character of being a Catholic state and a Catholic nation. I wanted to screen share. Am I able to screen share? Here we have sitting at the front, Mussolini with Cardinal Gaspari. These are some photos of the New York Times from 1929. I know you can't quite read it, but under the photo of Pius XI, it writes that he has achieved the revival of the temporal sovereignty of the Roman See. Again from the New York Times. I like this photo. Front and center again is Mussolini and Gaspari. Church and state in complete accord. Two days after signing the Lateran Treaty, speaking to a group of university students, Quoting from the document, "Perhaps," the Pope told them, "it helped that one side was headed by a librarian," the Pope, "and perhaps too what was needed was a man such as the one that Providence had us encounter, a man who did not share the concerns of the liberal school." Moving on from the Lateran Treaty. We don't have much time and a lot to say. We've spoken before about 1888. The document, How the Constitution Became Christian. And what was driving church and state together in 1888? A group threat. And the group threat was Jews, Adventists, Catholics, and secularists. But we demonstrated one of the threats was Catholics. They weren't friends. So let's come to Europe. In 1932, Mussolini visited the Pope. This generated worldwide coverage. We're not going to go into the sexism of the Vatican. Let's just say when a female international journalist turned up to report on it. She was not well received. This is the meeting between the Pope and Mussolini. After a minimum of pleasantries, Pius brought up the subject he thought most pressing. Protestant proselytizing, he told the surprised Mussolini, who was not expecting this to be at the top of the agenda for the meeting, is making progress in almost all of Italy's dioceses, as shown in a study that I had the bishops do. The Protestants are becoming ever bolder, and they speak of missions they want to organize in Italy. They are taking advantage of the Concordat's unfortunate language, which referred to non-Catholic religions as admitted cults. The Pope had opposed that phrase, preferring that they be described as tolerated cults. The Pope acknowledged that the Protestants were few, but argued that the threat was nonetheless great. He handed to the Duce a lengthy report on the question. Over the next years, he would bombard the dictator with requests to keep the Protestants in check. They're not friends. But Protestantism gives Catholicism glory. When they emulate them. The Pope added that he could understand the principle of totalitarian fascism, but this could only refer to the material realm. There were also spiritual needs, he said, and for these what was needed was Catholic totalitarianism. Finally, the Pope expressed his distress at what was going on in Russia, where, he said, the Bolsheviks were intent on destroying Christianity. Beneath this, said Pius, there is also the anti-Christian loathing of Judaism. When he was a nuncio in Poland, he recalled, I saw that in all the Bolshevik regiments, the civilian commissars were Jews. Group threat. Protestants, socialists, and Jews. There are many quotes for this. I'm only quoting enough to make the point. There's much more. Venturi played a part as well. He would spend years trying to convince Mussolini that a vast, evil conspiracy led by Protestants and Jews was at work, aimed at as much at the fascist dictator as the Catholic Church. He relied on a network of informants to feed him the latest news on the occult conspiracy. In June 1933, he sent Cardinal Pacelli a copy of one such report. At the center of the government, that is in the ministries, there are high bureaucratic officials who either are Jews or Masons, who want the prefects to think that the clergy and the Catholics should always be considered as enemies. Instead of wasting their time investigating priests, he said, government authorities should be looking into the formidable, underhanded, subversive activities of the Jews, the Masons, and the Protestants who, disguised as admirers of fascism, have become practically the feudal lords of Italy as they never were in the past. Mussolini had to be warned. The charge that Jews were the evil force behind a worldwide conspiracy against Christianity and European civilization had long been heard in the Vatican. The Jesuits of La Civiltà Cattolica were among its most avid proponents. A feature article titled "The World Revolution and the Jews" had appeared in the Vatican-supervised journal in late October 2022. As the fascists were marching on Rome, it described a world in chaos where secret forces orchestrated labor strikes and unrest in pursuit of the goal of communist revolution. The credulous masses participating in the revolts were mere stooges, manipulated by an occult power that showed telltale signs of coming from the ghetto. Where before have you heard that the idea that this occult empire foments chaos to create order? That is the foundational point of most of Walter Weitz's arguments. And it's those Freemasons. The popes had long condemned Freemasonry, and one of the first things Mussolini had done to please the Vatican after coming to power was to declare Freemasons ineligible for membership in the fascist party. Sorry, that one's not in the quote document. That's my second mistake. I'll repeat. The popes had long condemned Freemasonry. One of the first things Mussolini did to please the Vatican was to declare Freemasons ineligible for membership. In the fascist party. Coming back to racism. In the 1922 article in La Civiltà Cattolica. The leaders of the Bolshevik reign of terror were not indigenous Russians, but rather, quote, Jewish intruders who slyly masked their true identity behind Slavic-sounding pseudonyms. In short, although Jews comprised less than 5% of Russia's population, quote, this tiny minority today has invaded all the avenues of power and imposes its dictatorship on the nation. This 1922 article had great significance. It was used by the Nazis as a central justification for their anti-Semitism. anti-Semitic campaigns. The next issue of La Civiltà Cattolica, the first to appear after Mussolini came to power, carried news from Austria under the headlines, "Jewish Masonic Socialism Tyrannizes Austria." Following the Great War, the journal reported, Vienna's 19 Masonic lodges had formed a Grand Lodge. All of its high functionaries, without exception, were Jews. Their goal was to rule the world under the domination of the Masons, themselves under the Jews' power. If the Jews in Vienna got their way, the journal warned, Vienna will be nothing but a Jewish city. Houses and belongings will all be theirs. The Jews will be the bosses and lords, the Christians their servants. Austria will be absolutely the subject, tributary, and slave of the Jews. This, in short, is the guiding idea of our socialist Jewish Masonic leaders. You remove the word Jews, just like people now remove the words weight loss. You have Walter Weiff's whole prophetic message. You could just as well get it from La Civiltà Cattolica. So is it justified, the union between, is it justified for the Vatican to work with fascism in this history? They didn't like Hitler. They often hated Mussolini. But they're doing good things for the church. Mussolini has lots of affairs. His private life is not moral. It's not about his personal morality. It's about what he does for the church. So you need to accept an immoral leader. Because the church is under threat. It's the Catholic Church that will be oppressed if they aren't protected by the state. Where have we heard that before? 1888? Today? And in this history? I want to just touch on Australia for a moment. Australia has a fight right now. There's a controversial bill going through Parliament. aimed at protecting religious people from cancel culture. Among other things, it would allow Catholic schools the right to fire teachers or expel gay students in the name of religious ethos. The topic of religious discrimination has been at the centre of several public debates in recent years, particularly in the wake of Australia passing same-sex marriage legislation in 2017. That triggered a government inquiry led by Conservatives into whether religious groups felt their right to expression was being curtailed. Cases like rugby player Israel Folau being sacked from the National Wallabies side for saying on his Instagram that hell awaits gay people have also spurred the conversation. The problem is that the Prime Minister, Mr. Morrison, is a Pentecostal Christian who brought his pastor to the White House to meet Trump. And there's an election coming up. Quoting Mr. Morrison in the last paragraph, many people from various religious traditions are concerned about the lack of religious protection against the prevalence of cancel culture in Australian life, he told Parliament on Thursday. It's only been a few years since gay people had a right to marry. And the fight is over who is oppressed. Is it the Jews or the Catholics? I'm going to move on from that for time. So, hoping my questions were rhetorical by now. Let's move on to Hitler. Pope Pius XI had doubts about the Nazis. He fought with Mussolini, sometimes publicly. Humiliated Mussolini by talking about out-of-control nationalism. So we should expect Francis to have digs at Trump. You won't see you won't see how their goals align if you're waiting for evidence of a deep state occult friendship. The Pope too had doubts about the Nazis, but within weeks of Hitler's appointment, he began to have a more positive view. "I have changed my opinion about Hitler," he told the surprised French ambassador. "It is the first time that such a government voice has been raised to denounce Bolshevism in such categorical terms, joining with the voice of the Pope." Lots of Christians don't like Trump. They don't like everything he does. They may even dislike his racism. But they have to vote for him because he will fight against their threat. Neither Pope really liked or supported the Holocaust. It's not that simple. They didn't want the Holocaust. But who was going to oppose the group threat? Who else would protect Catholics? America wasn't, France wouldn't. America and France wouldn't. Best option was fascism. But even though they didn't support the Holocaust, their belief system was still anti-Semitic. This journal gives 3 solutions to the problem of the Jews. First solution: convert all Jews to Christianity. Don't think this is in your quotes because I had to paraphrase. Just check. So first you could convert all Jews to Christianity. But this was clearly not going to happen. Because they say that Jews stubbornly insist on remaining Jews. You could relocate Europe's Jews to Palestine. But that won't work because the land cannot support all 16 million. And also, even if it could, Jews would never do the necessary work. for they were, quoting the journal, uniquely endowed with the faculty of being parasites. And destroyers with no aptitude and no taste for manual labour. They give the third option, the only remaining option in their view. Strip Jews of their rights as citizens. Just one point. Of the 417 members of the highest leadership bodies, in the Soviet Union, in the mid-1920s, only 6% came from Jewish backgrounds. And in the 1930s, that 6% figure dropped sharply. Because Stalin was anti-Semitic. These are conspiracy theories. I wanted to go, but I won't for time. Into a secret deal that Pius XI made with Mussolini. In 1938. 40,000 Jews in Austria at that time were rounded up and placed in protective custody, quote. And Italy was beginning to issue its anti-Semitic laws. And the Pope agreed with Mussolini that he would say nothing to interfere with what Mussolini was doing. To protect his country from the Jewish threat. In exchange for some Catholic favors. But now we get to the end of the life of the first angel. It's 1939. World War II is about to begin. The Pope begins to see more clearly where this anti-Semitism is heading. He's also realized that he does not control Mussolini. This is not a church over state relationship as he had hoped. And he is filled with regret. The future Pius XII is by now his Secretary of State. Quote 22. Disillusioned and despondent, the Pope worried he had not been true to the sacred trust placed in him. He had let his patriotic sentiments as an Italian colour his judgment. He vowed to do all he could in the little time he had left to make amends. The problem by now is that Pacelli and lots of the other leaders around him do not share his regret. They're still invested in fascism. It's coming up to the 10-year anniversary of the Lateran Treaty. Mussolini knows that they're going to celebrate that 10-year anniversary. And is nervous about what Pius XI is going to say. And the Pope stops communicating with the other leaders about his speech. They're all nervous. We're going to skip a little, beginning with the London Daily Mail. The London Daily Mail published a story by its Rome correspondent claiming that Pius XI was planning a secret gathering of the cardinals to draft a ringing denunciation of racism. Rumours spread that the Pope was preparing a secret encyclical with the same aim. The ailing Pope was showing signs of losing control of the church he had long ruled with an iron hand. Those around him were frustrating his every attempt to prevent Italy from joining the Nazi cause. Convinced he hadn't much longer to live, the Pope saw the upcoming 10th anniversary of the Lateran Accords as his final chance to address Italy's bishops. As the big event approached, the Pope's health worsened, but the Pope's mind was lucid and his voice still clear. He spoke rapidly as if he knew he had little time left and much to say. They didn't usually do this. He had his speech printed, and it was to be given to the bishops he was speaking. With his health, he wasn't sure if they would hear every word. Not wanting to be misheard, he made sure there were many printed copies. But his health continued to crumble. At 1 a.m., the day before the speech was to be read, Pius XI passed away. The bishops had already arrived in celebration that meant on the Pope's desk was the folder, the idea that a good Christian could embrace racism, demanded an end to the persecution of the Jews. It was Pius XI's fervent hope that such a statement be issued, but among those who survived him, many were eager to see it buried along with the Pope. I'm going to read that quote again because it wasn't well captured in the English, but if the translators cannot translate, because they have translated the written copy. So just for the English. 5:31 a.m., the day before the speech was to be read, Pius XI passed away. The bishops had already arrived in Rome for the celebration that meant so much to the Pope. On the Pope's desk was the folder of Humani Generis Unitas, rejecting the idea that a good Christian could embrace racism. It demanded an end to the persecution of the Jews. It was Pius XI's fervent hope that such a statement be issued, but among those who survived him, many were eager to see it buried along with the Pope. That's already been translated. Moving on. Pacelli moved quickly. On February 15, he ordered the Pope's secretary to gather up all written material the Pope had produced in preparing his address. He also told the Vatican printing office to destroy all copies of the speech it had printed, copies that Pius had intended to give to the bishops. The vice director of the office gave his assurance that he would personally destroy them so that, quote, not a comma remained. The words the Pope had so painstakingly prepared in the last days of his life would never be seen as long as Pacelli lived. Only 20 years later, 4 months after Pacelli died, would Pope John XXIII, in one of his first acts, release excerpts of the speech. Only with the opening of the Vatican archives for the papacy of Pius XI in 2006 has the world seen the full text. There are many quotes that we have now that show the link between the Vatican and rising fascism. I could read you all the racist quotes. But I don't want to distort the picture. It wasn't always that simple. Pius XII's supporters argue that Pius employed diplomacy to aid the victims of the Nazis during the war, and through directing his church to provide discreet aid to Jews and others, saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Pius maintained links to the German resistance and shared intelligence with the Allies. There is far too much evidence to believe such a glowing report. But there is a little bit of truth to it. Pius XI condemned Mussolini's nationalism. Same way that Francis spoke quite unkindly of Trump's nationalism. You're not going to find friendship between Catholicism or Protestantism or governments. But if Italy had a constitution, you'd see them make it Christian. Because the issue is the group threat. Alpha history, alpha history. This is slavery. This is the Holocaust. Modern Israel and modern Babylon. In a history where it's the 6 commandments that are the test. We're in the same history now. Again, it's the 6. And you have to ask yourself, now that it's gender, racism and anti-Semitism still exist. But the great test centers on gender. Do you want to respond like a Millerite or like a Catholic? Do you worry about the church being oppressed by cancel culture? Walter Weiss acts like a 1920s Catholic. It's 1920s Catholicism. Ted Wilson says it more nicely. If you want to know what they really believe, look to Ghana. All that Ghana is doing is taking to the logical conclusion what the organizational leaders and thought leaders within Adventism teach. And where is Ted Wilson's sermon speaking against his own leadership? Where is his sermon condemning the steps taken in Ghana? He might not personally like what they're doing. I'm sure he doesn't want to see homosexuals physically hurt. But you have to have sympathy for a government trying to be moral, trying to protect themselves from the group threat. So whether it's Ghana or Uganda or Australia, Adventism stands here. They're about to be shipwrecked because right when on the subject of gender, they should be acting like a Millerite. They're acting like a pope. And that is why they fail the Sunday law. And it's not that the Catholic Church wanted all Jews to die. They just wanted them controlled to protect the Catholics, to protect the country. I hope we can see enough in what we've discussed tonight to see more clearly the problem with Adventism. When they say Babylon, is those secularists, is LGBTQIA+, all those gender aberrations. All the confusion when women don't act like women. And they'll throw Catholics in there just to be proper. But they don't even know how to define what Catholicism is now. Because Adventism can't define Babylon, like a Laodicean, they're acting like Babylon. And the decision we have to make is, what will we do with that? The church is not going to change for the better. People need to come out of it and act like a Millerite. If you kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you that the events in this world's history are not invisible to our gaze. It's not a deep state occult that we can't see. I pray, Lord, that you will help us to come out of Babylon in our worldview fully and completely, not compromising, not longing for its leeks and onions, not loving the watered down sexism of watered down Babylon, cultural feminism, liberal feminism, that even the Pope can preach. May we stand as an example, especially in this time, to Adventism, that they can make the stand that saves their lives. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.